special kinds. It's a free-flowing, ongoing discussion, but very much related to specific concerns and issues or opportunities that specific institutions in government or otherwise, universities, are preoccupied with. And the latest kind of preoccupation, the common preoccupation is there are things to do with data, with the value of data. And Friday, the open house has been initiated by the governor of the bank in relation to financial inclusion, and it was not because we thought that the value of data, the most visible and the visible one is the financial sector, but it's simply because all the central bank governors went to Washington for their spring meetings for IMF World Bank, which starts today. So it was Friday when we initiated the open house week, which is associated with the Commonwealth Summit and the Commonwealth Heads of Government, which is taking place this week in London. So I suppose we should have started with today's session, actually, the open house, because because of the need for understanding more the current preoccupation within the data sector, but also because immediately the data is associated with statistics. And national statistics offices, they have a network which has to be probably put together into an action network of a group of at least 10 of them as part of the overall program in the next 2 years. So, George, shall we?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor David and the others participating. It's an interesting topic to discuss and be briefed. And thank everybody for your contribution. Right, Professor David.
So, David, I think George is not from yet from African context. Albina, if you were here, you would have beat the drum when I was talking too much. But please go ahead. Go ahead, David.
Okay, so I'm going to give a brief introduction to the value and importance of data. That's what you are. Yes. That's what you want, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
This is what all of us want. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let me begin by making a sort of banal observation that you can't drive down the street without looking at the road ahead. You can't book a flight without getting the details of the journey. You can't decide what to eat or cook a meal without information on food. All of that is data. But at a larger scale, of course, you can't run a business, organise a hospital, steer a country, manage a school, and so on without information about what's going on and the ideas about how things will change if you take some action. Again, this is all about data describing whatever you're interested in looking at. Now, increasingly nowadays, data is captured automatically. So if you think of cell phone data, credit card data, health treatments, social media uses, transport data, whenever you undertake any of those sorts of activities, data is automatically used to facilitate the activity, to decide, to connect the cell phone link so that you can talk to the right person and so on. But then the data is typically stored nowadays in massive databases. And the reason for storing it in these massive databases is that they can be subsequently analysed so that one can understand better what's going on, understand better how people behave, and indeed make better decisions. So analysing these large data sets can make life easier for people. And we'll all be familiar with sort of trivial examples of this. For example, Amazon learning to identify your interests and making recommendations for you. Weather forecasting, that's a good example because it involves analysing massive data sets. But weather forecasting can make life a lot easier. lot better. It helps you decide whether to wear a thick coat or carry an umbrella or whatever, and can increase efficiency of businesses. Another example, a more recent example, would be automatic monitoring of traffic conditions or reporting of rail delays. So analysing data can make life better and easier for people. Increasingly nowadays, because of advances in computer technology, we are accumulating massive data sets, and especially we're accumulating data real-time and online, and we are able to make online decisions now about how people behave and what they would like. Trivial examples of this is the interest in autonomous vehicles, very much a real-time sort of decision-making process based on data sets which are captured from previous drivers, from how people have behaved in the past, millions and millions of them, and also immediate data from the radar systems on top of the cars. So massive data sets enabling us to understand better how people behave and might make life better for them. New kinds of data are being accumulated. So there are traditional things like survey data. There's administrative data relating to how people behave, data relating to tax affairs and so on. So data which are automatically captured from that so that we can, again, steer a country better, for example. More recently, there's web scrape data. We're probably all aware of alternatives to classical ways of constructing inflation indices, like the RPI and CPI. There are new alternative methods which have been developed over the last 10 years using web scraped data, for instance, where systems automatically trawl the web looking at prices for goods being offered on the web, and on the basis of that, look how the prices are changing and calculate new inflation indices. There are social media data. Again, a kind of administrative data because they record how people behave on such media. There are satellite data for monitoring crop growth and again, weather conditions and so on. There's mobile phone usage data. There are sensor network data and things like CCTV cameras monitoring how people, how crowds move and things like that to facilitate transport networks and so on. One of the particularly exciting developments in recent years is the capability and new data science technology for integrating data from multiple sources, because data from one source is quite powerful. I've given you illustrations of that, but it's when data are integrated from multiple sources that you get especially powerful sorts of facilities and opportunities. That's a sort of an enthusiast's description of the possibilities, if you like. But we must also be aware that there are ethical issues associated with the use of data. And it's important to monitor these and be aware of them. What I'm really talking about here is things like what's the right, proper and legitimate way to use data? How much intrusion is it legitimate to have into someone's life? How much data on their behaviour can you rightly collect? And I have to say that different countries have different views on this. We can talk a bit about that later if you like.
Yeah.
So we're really talking about things like privacy and consent to use data. And of course, this has blown up in recent days with the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica case, and has become very much to the fore. It's forced itself into the public perception. But the truth is, of course, that people have been thinking about this sort of thing for a long time now. The European Union has recently introduced its General Data Protection Regulation, but that didn't suddenly spring into being out of nowhere. People have been planning that for years, and indeed it was based on previous data protection rules and laws. So, people have been thinking about these for a long time, but with the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica case, it's suddenly come into the public forum. So there are, in some sense, ethical issues which are, in a sense, pulling it in the opposite direction to the technology, but they're not opposed to the technology. What they really mean is that when one implements these amazing new technologies which will make life easier, we must think carefully about how we're doing it to see that we're doing it in a morally acceptable way. the bottom line with all of this sort of thing, and this applies to any advanced technology, data technology, nuclear technology, biotechnology, whatever, is that zero risk can be attained only at the cost of zero benefit. There's also a corollary, though, I think, which is very important, and this is the bottom line, if you like, that no organisation, no country, and no people can afford to lose out on the data revolution. It would be like losing out on the Industrial Revolution. We'd fall further and further behind if we didn't take advantage of the amazing opportunities offered by the advances which have been and are going on and are likely to go on into the future. One way to try to choose an acceptable level of risk while attaining the most benefit one can is to appoint to create some independent oversight bodies. They have to be independent of corporate interests, commercial interests, obviously, but also, I think, of government interests. And we've seen some of the issues which can arise if that's not done when with certain non-statistical institutes being challenged when they produce objective data and governments didn't like it. So I think independence of oversight bodies is critical. So I talked about the technology, I talked about the sort of ethical issues. There's one other issue which is absolutely vital, which is critical if we're going to gain advantage of these. This is capability. Mm-hmm. Data scientists are needed everywhere. Google recruits thousands, the financial sector recruits thousands. Everywhere would like to have lots more data scientists. So there's competition for trained personnel. Now, the good side, the good thing is that universities have cottoned on to this, and I think every university in the world probably has its own data science degree course or training program or data science center or institute now. So, things are getting better. But at the moment, there is a dearth of such people. There is competition for trained personnel. Governments certainly need these people so that they have accurate information on which to base their decisions. Corporations need them since they provide understanding of the business. There are, of course, quite a few, if you look at the web, online courses. And I think this is a good way to go to get a sort of rapid head start, a rapid boost in training of people. But I think in general, countries should start national integrated data science training programs now if they are to capitalize on these amazing opportunities as quickly as possible. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm very happy to discuss any of the things in more detail or answer questions or whatever.
David, you didn't approach the issue of statistics because specifically...
okay.
Because
all right. Let me say a little bit about that. So data science is a combination of statistics, the discipline, and computer science, the discipline. Statistics is needed for summarizing, analyzing, and making inferences about masses of data, understanding what's going on in the data, where the data came from, what generated the data. Computer science is needed to manipulate the data, to sort it, search it, store it, and so on. So these two things come together. But if you look at the curriculum of data science master's degrees around the world, we find that these curricula are 80% statistics. Statistics is about understanding where the data are coming from, the mechanism generating the data. So statistics is the fundamental sort of science or technology underlying data science.
Okay.
Thank you very much, yes.
Yeah.
It was a very wide spectrum analysis and introduction. Thank you very much, Professor David. And then data and information go together. Could you just comment a little on an old-fashioned statement, paralysis by analysis? Sorry, could you repeat the last? That in the past, in trying to analyze data through a computer, you would reach a stage of paralysis through analysis. You are analyzing things, data, and before you would arrive at information, you were paralyzed and confused.
Yeah.
How can you get through
this is
it?
a very interesting sort of question. I'm not sure where to begin.
No.
Before you can analyze data, okay, so at a basic level, data always comes with issues, with quality issues, with selection bias issues. So before you can actually fit your models, begin to undertake your statistical analysis, it is necessary to look closely at the data to make sure it is clean and adequate. I can give you any number of examples of situations where people have rushed in analysing data which have got problems with it and drawn incorrect conclusions. Actually, this is quite interesting because statisticians, I think, are intrinsically conservative and are less likely to make those sorts of mistakes.
Yes.
They will ask us
Yeah.
questions such as, where did the data come from? Does it conform to distributions and so on? Whereas,
Okay. Albina, any questions from you? Sorry, David.
Thank you.
Albina, you are online?
Yes.
Dr. Chua,
Yeah, I'm online.
do you want to kind of, questions are more important than you listening to David's kind of overall very, very, very good presentation of issues around data. Before you go into statistics as such, are there any questions you might want to put to him?
Well, I don't have a question, rather, but what Professor has just said, it is true that we need to integrate data scientists in our training centers, statistical training centers, or in our universities. And these data scientists, they will help us because, as you pointed out, data is a set of values. It has a meaning now when you use the statistics to convert those. And according to my experience right now, and the data revolution that we are seeing right now, which goes in line with big data, the issue of integration and, of course, as you pointed out, financial inclusion, really there is no way out that we should not work hand in hand and ensure the training is really imparted to the statisticians who are sitting under the national statistical offices to ensure they can integrate the algorithm that we are talking about. The paradigm shift, the way we do our calculations, the way we do our data, and so it has to change to go in line with the technologies. And these technologies now will come straight from these data scientists that they need to be trained. The other issue that I really also want to speak out is about the quality of the data. The way it is being collected is very important. And this has created a lot of debate. In New York meeting, let's say when we had our meeting there in New York, in terms of non-official data or non-official statistics,
Yes.
we need this data because if you go along with the implementation of the SDGs, we need a lot of data, and we cannot leave the statistical offices to produce this data alone. We need as many partners to do so. But again, the quality has to be embraced, starting from the beginning to the end. Otherwise, the data and statistical information that we want to have, that will demonstrate the value of our offices, of our national statistical offices, it won't be there. Because if we collect data which has no quality, or statistical information in which quality is not good, then we will misinform decision making, and eventually, if we misinform decision making, then your policies, then what next is disaster in the country.
But Albina, David was making a point that actually the technology, as it evolved and continues to evolve rapidly, allows automatic collection of data. The question is having access to that data, isn't it? And then having ability to analytics to organize the data, isn't it?
Can I?
Yeah,
Yes,
David.
But one thing
I
is
think-
technology. One thing is, Madam Mihaela, technology is fine, but technology should not derive personnel. We need
No.
to derive technology. You can have a technology, but you don't have the quality. You collect
Okay.
data, but your technology can't help you. So if you're going to integrate your technology, ensure the technology that you are using, it has to be the components of quality.
Yeah.
And that's
Okay.
why now we normally do the pre-test and the pilot.
Okay.
Can I just say, I
Yes.
entirely agree that data quality is absolutely crucial, and new ways of collecting data, massive data sets, introduce new quality challenges.
Yes.
You're absolutely right.
Exactly.
If the data
Right,
is
right,
of poor
right.
quality, one is likely to draw poor conclusions. So I have a particular interest in data quality because I think it is so central, so important. And exactly as you say, there are tremendous opportunities from these new ways of capturing data, from these new kinds of data sources. But of course, they all bring with them particular challenges. Some people have said that you don't need to worry about these sorts of things now because the massive data sets, that any quality issues will wash out. But that is not true. What they're more likely to do is amplify. So I agree with you, quality is essential. And it applies just as much to new kinds of data, to social media data, to web scrape data,
Exactly,
to automatic scanner data as traditional sources.
Actually, about 2 months ago, there was a presentation of an application of artificial intelligence, to accounting, to audit. And the one of the major questions from everybody was the data that we have that is accumulated technology-wise or otherwise is of so many quality. It is not of a standard that.
Yes.
So, and the artificial intelligence individual said, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, you just have to go ahead. It's exactly what you said. Because through machine learning, one could kind of, and huge data that is available. But you're quite right, is an issue. David, there is also quite a lot of concern, I heard, not only from central banks, about the new ways to trade some of the huge amounts of data. The emerging data markets, and then again the question is the quality of that data. How?
Yeah. That's right. I mean, data has very much become a commodity. People describe it as the new oil, and that has various meanings. One is that it is a commodity in its own right. And that, of course, opens up all sorts of questions about who actually owns the data. Is it the people who captured the data, who recorded it, for example, the supermarket, which recorded your purchases, or does that data belong to you? And there are a lot of discussions about these sorts of questions at the moment. What is clearly true is that data are valuable because, bottom line, they can be sold, they can be turned into money. So there are big debates about these sorts of issues at the moment, and I think the answers are not straightforward and not very clear yet.
Okay. Well, I mean, Albina, in the context of the your National Statistics Office, I mean, since last year, were there any possibilities to kind of bring in to the attention of the system, the government, the need for data scientists and data frameworks for national statistics to... Could you come in, please?
Yes. Let me start by saying not only for the last year. In fact, since the inception of the SDGs for 2030, in fact, data gaps really becomes challenges to the national statistics offices even here in Tanzania, and it's even much worse for the developing countries, and especially in Africa. really what we did very quickly is to tap the opportunities from different partners. And in terms of training some of our statisticians in the different way of coming up with the technology. For instance, and at the World Bank there is a survey solution. Survey solution, this is a software that is being used and the CAPI. CAPI is a computer assistant, something which is being used to collect data in the field. And in doing so, the same World Bank has also supported some of our training institutions in Africa. For instance, we have Eastern Statistical Training Center in Tanzania, which served all English-speaking countries. So this type of training is being integrated in their curriculum. And the same, I think, it has been taken into Europe. I think Eurostat, they are also using the same thing to train their candidates there. So we have started this move because the idea behind it is to have as many data scientists as possible. And as you are aware of Rwanda, they have established this institution, which we think also is going to help a lot to have as many data scientists as possible in the developing countries like Africa and in Tanzania. But this is the way we want to move. As I said, the time has come for us, we network officers, to migrate now from the traditional way of data production to the modern way of producing more data for evidence-based and policy making. So we are trying really on those areas to ensure we have as many data scientists as possible. And in Africa, let me talk about in Africa, for instance. In Africa, we have these statistical training centers. There are almost like 4. And because of these SDGs indicators and so, under the AUC, this is African Union Commission, and UNECA, this is United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, purposely they have introduced this curriculum to ensure training for the specific indicators. Because, for instance, there is here, Professor David, you will agree with me, the way we are calculating our GDPs, we are using SNA 2008, but we are missing some of the information that we can gather from supermarkets. For instance, the GDP is missing the wealth. Wealth data are not being incorporated in the comparison of GDPs. So these are the areas that we need data scientists as many as possible to assist national statistical officers to manage, to estimate these correct numbers by using these different data that we are talking about. This is what really I can share with you, Madam Mihaela.
Yeah, Albina, just I was wondering, within the Tanzanian context or other more specific African context, I mean, is there a question about trying to consolidate the mandate of the National National Statistics Bureau? Because the mandate or what you are allowed to do without necessarily making reference to central bank, for instance.
In fact, we do have mandates. We do have mandates. If you revisit our Statistics Act of 2015, all official statistical data or statistics has to come from the national statistical offices. So my office now, the role is to coordinate and to harmonize all the official data or information that the government will use for the planning purposes. This has already been given that mandate. So, for instance, myself here, I'm working very closely with the central bank here. And the central bank in Tanzania, for instance, is sitting as the board chair of the National Statistical Office here in Tanzania. So you find we still have this mandate, and no one would be allowed to release the official number without passing the first in its methodology to the National Statistical Office for vetting. And the National Statistical Offices, we do even have another board. We normally have the peer reviews. For instance, when we are about to release our GDP based numbers, we have to call upon big international organizations like World Bank, like United Nations Statistical Division, like United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ADB, to peer review the whole process before we announce the official release of these numbers.
Okay.
The mandate we have.
So access to data, does that give data of the kind that David was talking about as different from conventional access or collection that all the national statistics offices do? Never mind what you do with that data. Access to the type of data, how is that the preoccupation for the statistics office? You see?
Well, if I could share my experience, for instance, access of data. What I normally do in my office, once we are done with our analysis, once we are through with the release of the data, what we normally do is to remove the confidentiality, is to remove the identifiers.
Yeah.
After removing the identifiers, we normally post the information into the website and call upon any user to make use of the data, the micro data, for further analysis. So for us, we don't have any restriction of releasing data unless otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay. David, any reaction to? I mean, I don't know what in ONS.
Just to say,
Yeah.
that of course is an advantage that national statistics institutes have over, for instance, commercial organisations, because an NSI normally is trying to make general statements about the population and isn't interested in particular individuals so that it can anonymise. Of course, there are parts of government which do need to retain the identified tax offices and things like that, but national statistical institutes don't have that problem. So, yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, this is Yanir. Hi, Hela.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Yanir. Good morning to you. It's about 7:30 or thereabout in Pittsburgh.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, you had your breakfast, or you're going to have it after?
I will have it afterwards.
We're
yes,
going to
thank
have
you.
lunch soon or after lunch. Okay. David, Yanir, Professor Yanir will introduce himself. But Yanir, we have Professor David Hand from Imperial College, the Data Science Center, and Dr. Albina Chua from Bureau of Statistics in Chief Executive of Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. And we have also online from Uganda. Is that Florence and Rachel online? And anyway, we have Dr. George Christodoulides from Cyprus, Mrs. Cathy Cunningham from UK, and Nick, a legal hat, a legal dimension, and Robert Smith, more of an engineer. So, we are, as you know, webcasting, recording as we speak, and David made an entree into the value of data and the kind of implications that one needs to be aware of. And Albina specifically related to the National Statistics Offices. So yesterday we were talking about you relating the value of data or strategic value of data to the national planning. Yeah?
Yes.
But anyway, you go ahead, Yanir, please. And thank you very much for coming.
First of all, you wanted me to introduce myself. So
Please.
I'm the president of the New England Complex Systems Institute. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we are okay, actually.
Yep.
Good. And I'm a complex systems scientist. And I think the first thing that I would say is, hearing a little bit of the earlier discussion, is that sure, there may be some value to having data, but what we are involved in doing is converting data into something that can be useful for decision making. Having a small amount of data may be providing some insights if you know how to use it. But actually, the more data one has, the more difficult it is to understand how to use it. And the key thing is actually to identify which data to look at, which part of the data, which aspect of the data. And typically, the data that it's important to look at is not one particular number or a few particular numbers. Indeed, the whole point of complex system science is really that it's the patterns across the data that inform us in the best way what we should be engaged in, or how to make better decisions, what are the vulnerabilities of the system, or what are the opportunities. And so when we are thinking about data, we really think about it as the knowledge from which we can build a structure of understanding, and it's the structure of understanding that is the enabling or the opportunity for either protecting oneself from harm in the context of risk, or taking advantage of actions that can improve national or corporate or global conditions.
So it's a structure of understanding. So then?
So maybe I should take a step back and say that complex system science, the ability to do that in traditional mathematical frameworks is limited, because we all know the old adage correlation, billions today, or trillions even, of variables to look at. Finding correlations is not only difficult, they may be spurious. Surely, even when one has a correlation, it's hard to understand what one finds. But the whole point of complex system science is to go beyond the inquiry of two variables or a few variables. And it's not about even understanding the correlations among many variables, because again, correlations are not the same as patterns of behavior. It's the dynamics of the system as a whole that are revealed by those patterns. And then one really needs a different mathematics. There are many tools in complex system science. There are networks, there are agent-based models, there are nonlinear dynamical behaviors, system dynamics, there are dimensional reduction methods. Many of them are useful for different purposes. And one has to recognize, like tools of building a building, that different tools are useful for different purposes. And by using a tool in the right way, one can make advances. There is a framework. It's really not a specific tool, but a more general framework of mathematical representation that was developed in physics in the context of studying phase transitions. So when a water boils or a magnet becomes magnetic or demagnetizes, those are transitions of collective behavior when the whole system undergoes a change. And in that context, it was recognized that the basic framework of calculus and statistics failed. And what was developed was a way of understanding not a specific mathematical representation like set of equations, but really how to understand which dimensions or which variables or which coordinates were the important ones. We call them technically the relevant ones. But really it's how do we identify which description of the system is the one that we need in order to characterize its behavior. And so it connects to all of the other methods, because sometimes we may need a dynamical equation, sometimes an agent-based model, sometimes a fractal or other behavior. But we need some method for understanding which mathematical representation is needed. And that's what this tool, the tool originally is called renormalization group. It's a way of thinking in scale, and we have developed it in the context of multi-scale information theory as a tool that we can use in complex systems where we don't know from the beginning what description is needed, and to obtain that description and then use the description to characterize the behavior and then connect it to real-world challenges. And we've used this approach in addressing a variety of different actual challenges like ethnic violence, the financial crisis, market crashes, the outcome of revolutions. It's surprising, really, that such a fundamental mathematical method directly connects to real-world challenges, but that's the whole point. It's really about understanding transitions of behavior. I didn't mention pandemics, which is another area. The point is that when you have a behavior that you understand, because we have experience with it, and we can use statistics because we have prior events, then we don't need new methods because we have the experience, we have the events that tell us what's going to happen in the future. So the time when we cannot do that is the time when there is a transition, a dramatic change. And that's exactly the circumstance where this new method, it's not so new really, it was developed in 1970, but its application to social systems, to economic systems, to global challenges is new. And it's necessary and appropriate today because of the fact that the world is undergoing a transition. If the world were not undergoing transitions of behavior, the statistics and the calculus and the traditional mathematics would be sufficient.
So Yanir, are we saying that, for instance, national statistic offices, do require to probably get not only building capability in data science, but also in complexity systems, particularly specifically in what you just mentioned?
The traditional role of the statistical office originally is inherently statistical, to understand just the population as a statistical entity. But if the statistical office, and that's ultimately its real purpose, is to inform us about decisions of policies, then yes, there is need for not only new data, but also the ability to use that data for informing decisions.
Can I come in, Madam
Yeah,
Maela?
Albina, come in. Yeah, ask Yanir. Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Thank you so much. The last speaker has pointed out a very critical point to the National Statistics Offices.
I'm sorry, please speak slowly. I am having a hard time understanding.
Yeah,
Go ahead again.
Albina, please. No, go ahead.
I'll do that.
No problem.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, it is true that at the National Statistics Offices, the data that we do produce is to inform decision making. Because that. And what you said about as you have as many data or statistical information, you may sometimes have a difficulty to interpret those numbers. It is true. But he pointed out the issue of many modeling that is normally being used. But to me, I would say, yes, you choose the model that you think it suits the condition of what you want to do. Let me give you an example. When we are doing the population projection, there are many modeling that have been developed across the globe. There are modeling from the African context, UN, and so on. But there are different levels that you think, for instance, mortality. You look at the under 5 mortality. Where do you fit? Then you adjust yourself and produce and you align yourself, find the level that suits your condition. But for the policy makers, the issue of the users for informing decision making, decision makers, they don't need those nomenclatures. They don't need those modeling. What they need end results. They need what is the infant mortality. They need what is the GDP. They need what is the inflation. And
yes. So let me address that. Let me address that because you're exactly pointing out to what my point is, and let me just clarify.
okay.
So first of all, many people make models, but if they're models that they just think up, those are what we call ad hoc models, and they're not fundamentally based. They have many parameters, and it's impossible to validate them. The whole point of the models that we are talking about here, or the mathematical representations more correctly, is that they have few important parameters and can be validated. And the process of validation shows that one can indeed identify what is the end result of an intervention. Not always does one have certainty, but one also can identify the uncertainty. The validation is incredibly important as a part of the process because it gives the policymaker confidence that they can rely on the analysis, and this is not just the model, but the entire analysis, to identify what the outcome is. Today, because of the complexity of the world, the outcomes of actions is unclear, and the unintended consequences are severe. So we have to clarify exactly the consequences of the intervention. Then there continues to be room for decision, but the decision is informed. 100 years ago, maybe one could know the connection between the intervention and the consequence. Today, the intervention and the context seem totally disconnected one from the other. So, use ideology because they don't have an understanding of consequence. And so this is exactly the point.
Can I, David, are you still online?
I am, yes.
Yeah, David, I mean, how would you relate the data and data analytics, the data science, to the modeling that and based on complexity that Yanir is talking about.
Yeah. I think complexity theory has got a lot to contribute, but I think many of its models are fundamentally brittle. Agent-based systems, I think, of course, are fundamentally brittle because you change the nature of the agents and the interactions, and you can get radically different, and this is the fun point about complexity theory, you can get radically different emergent behaviors or final outcomes. Having said that, although I don't agree that the world has got more complex in terms of not knowing the outcomes of interventions and so on, it's certainly true that it is difficult to know, as you say, as Yanir said, unintended consequences and so on. You can't be sure what will happen. So any tools we can bring to bear on enhancing, potentially enhancing understanding of what might go on, what might go wrong, are potentially very valuable.
Right. Let me address the point you made about the brittleness of models. So there are two potential reasons that models are brittle. One is that they are not correct models, and that's important to correct.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about before. The other is that they're correct models, and the brittleness reflects the inability to actually, it reflects the inherent uncertainty. And if that's the case, we must know that as well. So it is not that the models are, in other words, if the models are correctly reflecting reality, then brittleness becomes something that we want to know, and we must know as part of the uncertainty of consequences of decisions. That's the reality, and we better know it.
Okay, I agree that brittleness can arise from different sources,
but it's not. But let me just make it clear: if it's because of the model, then we have the methods, and that's exactly what I was saying. Most of the modeling that you're familiar with is what I called ad hoc models with large numbers of parameters.
Okay, that's not quite true. I mean, fundamentally, in statistical analysis, there are two kinds of models. There are data-driven models and theory-driven models. The publicity over the last 10, 20 years has, of course, all been about massive data sets and data-driven models where people identify correlations, not causations. But the other class of models are based on sound underlying theories. Physics is a good example of this sort of thing, of course, of good underlying theories. Now, I think what you would, I think, call the ad hoc models, the data-driven models, which are based purely on things like observed correlations and relationships within the data, are fundamentally brittle, because if the world changes, they won't pick up on the change. Anyone has any number of examples of this sort of thing.
So excuse me, I apologize, but there's limited time, so I'm going to make going to intervene here for a moment.
Yeah.
Both theory and data-driven models can be ad hoc, and both of them can be fundamental. The difference is the nature of the construction of the models. When we construct models from data, we use dimensional reduction methods that result in low-dimensional models that are validated against the real-world information. And when we use theory-driven models, we also use methods that are, again, this is renormalization group-driven, multi-scale models that are characterizing the low-dimensional behavior of the system. And let me give you a reference so that you can read about this method. There's a paper called Why Complexity is Different. And there is a second paper that is a little bit more of the technical aspects of it and applications, which is called From Big Data to Important Information. And again, just to be clear, both theoretically driven models and data-driven models can be ad hoc models and can be fundamental, dimensionally reduced, relevant parameter-based, validated models.
So,
I have to. I'm sorry.
Just
have,
one second, Yanir. Yeah.
Ask me.
Yeah.
Hila asked me as a favor to
Yeah.
come today.
Yeah. Just 1 second, Yanir.
Like
Can we
before I quit.
can we go back to Albina? Yeah.
Oh wait. Hila, just let me say one more.
Yeah,
thing.
please.
I would like to transfer the call to my colleague Kim, who I would like her to talk a little bit about next steps in terms of advancing the discussion.
Okay.
But go ahead. If
Yeah.
you want to have one more question.
Okay. Albina, now, I mean, you are kind of better than a typical kind of national statistic office. You are quite advanced in African context, yeah, and Commonwealth.
Yeah.
So now you have one input on the data science and so on from David, and of course you have another input in relation to requirement for modeling and understanding complexity for this data to go towards the decision makers, as you, yeah. So how would you go about the two dimensions? Or it is, because it sounds probably a little bit overwhelming on both, one would say. I mean, there are excellent inputs that we had on both sides, and what is your reaction to this? Because for the next 2 years,
Can I jump in? I'm going to have to go now. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Hold 1 second, Albina. David.
I'm going to have to sign off now to go to another meeting. I'm terribly sorry.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Albina,
Thank you.
go ahead.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I mean, according to the last speaker on the complexity, it has called me back on the complex designing, where you have to use as many modeling as possible, like jackknife models, all these models, kind of. But this is very fine, and as he pointed out, validation, of course. Validation is also very important to this modeling and so. But again, I still believe that any modeling has its own limitations, which has to be looked into it before you do your analysis and tell the evidence. But again, this is also very frustrating because we are going for the big data. This is the official data that we are talking about, and we have to use all these modeling things that he's talking about. And how to do it now is to integrate all this kind of complexity into our curriculum, in our schools, in our universities, so that we have a new generation that they can deal with all this modeling. What really we want at the end is to have the data, is to have the parameter that will tell exactly what planners they want to plan for our people to inform decision making. This is really what I can gather from them.
Okay, well, I suppose some of these models probably are in ministries of national planning or at a higher level. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Hello?
So, Madam, I have another meeting. So
Yeah. Okay. Okay. We will continue to discuss here. Yanir is online, or Kim?
Yanir is still nearby, and so am I.
That's Kim. Kim online.
Yeah.
Okay. Kim, welcome and thank you for organizing Yanir from Pittsburgh. You are where are you now?
You are most welcome. We're in Pittsburgh, actually.
You are in Pittsburgh. Okay.
Yes.
So, could you try to put forward what we were discussing yesterday?
Sure. I mean, I think the point that Yanir was trying to make, and I might be able to resound this a little bit, is that the traditional approaches are no longer adequate. And this is especially relevant to what you're doing in the statistical office, and that we need to develop new strategies in order to frame responses that are actionable, something, that we can really make sure that we're achieving the desired outcomes that we want. And with that, because of the complexity of the world that everyone is aware of, we have to use complex system science principles. And if we don't, there's a lot that's going to be missed. I know that everyone hears a lot about artificial intelligence sort of taking over the way that we approach it. And I heard mention earlier of big data. Along those lines, things are changing. It's sort of a fast-moving train, and pardon my cold. So if we're prepared, in order to be prepared for what lies ahead, it's going to take a lot. Larger countries like the U.S. and China and Russia are really investing, formally now, building departments around artificial intelligence and data.
Right. Okay. Just 1 second, Kim. Is that Kampala? Is that Florence or Rachel? Online? Who is that?
Hi.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Maila. This is Tadeo.
Okay, Tadeo. So probably you'll come in with a question which we could answer as soon as Kim, and Kim might be able to stay another few minutes online. Yeah? Kim, could you tell us that NEXI is involved in the Institute, is at the forefront of complexity systems and so on. And in similar mode as data science with data analytics, yeah? People are require, I have a piece of paper here saying talking data, talking complexity in a plain English, right? That's what actually everybody is wishing to. So how do you deal with interface of decision makers? You're going to have in April this meeting again, which you invited, next year, Yanir invited everybody, in Washington, for instance. So one needs to prepare these decision makers to understand some of these, give them a guide to the complexity, as there is a need for a guide to data analytics, yeah?
And that's the focus of what we're doing with the executive program. Like the one in DC this spring, it is designed to sort of bridge that gap in understanding potentially that you talk about, where people, like you say, the regular person who's out there making the decisions and people involved in policy and in government, and also organizationally in the corporate world. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to really help them to understand in sort of a layman's fashion what it is all about, so that they can be actively engaged.
Right.
Bringing, the benefits back to their organizations.
Okay. I think there may be some questions from here, but Tadeusz or anybody from Kampala, you were online, so we have Kim,
yes.
You had Professor Yanir, Professor David Hand, and we are here, Dr. Christodoulides, and so on. Any particular concerns would you have vis-a-vis the National Statistics Office in Uganda? Ben wasn't able to be.
My concern, Dr. Maila, is on the issues of, I have enjoyed the submissions by the gentleman and the lady, on particular issues of on data management, because data and security usually move hand in hand, and any data of a country is very sensitive. It is in every country's security interest. So you realize all the data agencies have got to work closely with the security people. The intelligence and the national security has got to play a very key role. So I wanted to know, like in developing economies, there is usually a tendency of technology transfer, where a technology is developed and then sometimes we do not know the entire setup of a technology, and then there is a bit of a transfer at some point where we possibly do not have a prototype. So we jump onto something, and then eventually there are threats there that come with any emerging, technology. So I wanted to know from the people who are at the heart of, developing technologies and of course who are into the design and modeling, how would developing economies be taking part? Because they might not be at this stage developing their own technologies, where they have all they have captured all the threats at that stage. So I would, for example, look at my own country, in Uganda. We might have a bit of information on how to manage our data, but the technology is not yet in place. And maybe the UK and Malaysia and all these other countries have gone so far ahead of us. So, and when you are in conferences and in meetings, then you feel a bit challenged, and people are telling you the steps they have taken, or possibly they could be even reaching a level where now we are even talking about things of artificial intelligence. Partly, some of these things we might just borrow them and bring them without necessarily knowing the threats.
But I don't know. I mean, Kim, probably, if you still can be online, I want to ask here. Yeah, just 1 second. George, you have a point?
No, it's very interesting discussion.
No, about Tadeusz.
Well, I just have one question really, but you're probably not going to have the time to answer it, which is that the normalization group-driven analysis, which you talked about, you referred to, you've given 2 papers as examples of
why complex?
Those things we should be reading. So clearly, I'm going to go away and read those.
Yeah,
but I do think that the discussion was going a bit round in a circle. On the one hand, you want the data. On the other hand, you want the models. And you want the 2 things to come together in a sensible way. Now, that doesn't seem to be very complex. But on the other hand, I realise that actually doing it is complex. So I'm just quite unsure at the moment on what the the lesson is for us to take on board at the moment.
I think the 3rd dimension was brought in by Tadeusz and the group in Kampala about data technology, if I could say so. But I don't know, Kim, you have any other points?
I would love to, I hope, answer to that question, or at least validate what you're saying. It is true that I think that the complicated part, or the complex part, is the value of the data is really limited to the value of the analysis, which is what we're talking about. And then, I'm sorry, I missed the name of the gentleman, but earlier he made a very good point.
Tadeusz.
Tadeusz?
Yes, from Kampala, Uganda.
Oh, from Kampala. You made a very good point, sir, about that it is fine to understand that there is a need to use these technologies, but not everyone has it readily available. And gosh, I mean, I can't help but take that opportunity to sort of pitch to you that is where people like us, organizations like NEXI, can act as a resource. We can be an enabler that allows you to sort of produce the fruits of such technology without actually, quote unquote, owning it for your own. So we'd be happy to speak to you about that.
Okay. I suppose the question that Mrs. Cathy Cunningham is saying, is just mentioned, which is what are we taking from this discussion in relation to the program for the next 2 years as part of leveraging the value of data. I think, obviously one needs to demystify both the issues related to data analytics, demystify the issue to do with the modeling, which is not modeling of a normal, I shouldn't use normal because you relate to normalization, of a conventional nature, to make the best of the data that you have. And obviously there has to be an attention given to the blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology, machine learning, and everything that is put under the umbrella of so-called artificial intelligence. And I'm saying so-called because actually, Tadeusz, you do know, when we were in Kampala together, we were discussing about the fact that probably in the various systems, security or otherwise, that you already have in Uganda, probably there are integrated some of the aspects of artificial intelligence without people knowing about it. So the question is, how better off would we be were we to know how that technology comes about and what it's all about? And with specific focus today at the modernizing national statistics, or not modernizing, kind of disrupting the conventional statistics, because these technologies are disrupting. The national statistics very obviously cannot function without data science, without data technology, and without adequate modeling. That's what it is, the conclusion. So if we are to do some experiment in the next 2 years in about a number of countries, this is what probably we should do. But of course it cannot be dealt with in a separate kind of silos mode, just national statistics offices. The whole point is that this data comes about within the interaction between the central banks, the national planning, the entire system. And here is where Yanir is right, that unless there is a framework of understanding how this data comes about, and you have a way to analyze the data that you want to use, which is what David Hand is saying, then so there has to be a kind of not just the National Statistics Office preoccupied with the issue of data and modeling, and not just the central banks on their own, because it's not going to be relevant, it's not going to be useful to anybody. Yeah? So, I mean, that was the point that we made. So, Kim, thank you very much for bringing in today Yanir, and hopefully we'll meet your colleague Alfred Morales on Thursday. Yeah?
Thursday, and he's looking forward to it very much.
Okay, so if there are any, we knew Yanir well, and we are playing his webcast of 2 years ago, which is more in detail about complexity. But we don't know Alfredo Morales, so maybe he can forward some background PowerPoints or anything he would want to. George, Cathy, are there anything?
I have an observation.
Okay.
I can use it. So the whole problem, it seems to me, which is actually quite a common problem, is about marrying the top-down approach to the bottom-up approach, somehow they meet in the middle. And this is, I think, what Kathy was alluding to some extent, that you've somehow got to marry the models and the data together. That's the business of meeting in the middle. But I think it's worth recognising that you have a system and you're trying to find out something about it, so that perhaps you can make some kind of an assessment of how it's going to behave in the future. That's why you would want to know about it and how you can affect its behaviour in the future, perhaps. And you have this data source potentially, which you can use to help you do that. I really haven't much more to say, except that the marrying up job of the system on the one hand and the data on the other is quite an intricate task.
But I think that there is
and
point
if I could just
about the
add,
technology.
if I could just add, I think the discussion between Yanir and David Hand earlier on indicated the kinds of issues that arise, and that particular issue of the brittleness of a model.
Yeah.
That in itself is an intricate issue, I think.
Yeah. But of course, that's very dependent also on the kind of digital landscape evolving, that they are kind of distributed ledgers together with artificial intelligence and so on. That makes brings in a third important dimension to this issue between data you collect, data you analyze, and the kind of models you are using.
Artificial intelligence, to me anyway, provides a set of techniques that you can potentially employ, which helps this process of marrying in the middle the sort of top-down thing you've got, the complex system, with the data that you potentially have to understand it and to affect its future behaviour.
So the question was, is there a need for a conventional statistician? I think Tadeusz is on, a conventional statistician, or conventional training for a statistician, or there is a need for a data analyst stroke statistician. So I suppose the issues are continuing to be at the edge, evolving, emerging, but there are very practical also issues that are taking place, and one cannot wait until those things are being clarified. So national statistical offices, they do have a very big issue. They cannot provide at the moment real-time data and statistics without going through some minimal kind of preparation and implementation with their own context, both in data and modeling. So that's...
But the key issue is how to get validated information. At the end of the whole process, the modeling and the system you use and the techniques, unless you get validated information, is just a problem, and it's not worth it.
George, are you talking about validated information or validated data?
Well,
the distinction that I make between the two is that
Quality.
data is the input, if you like.
Exactly,
The raw material could
Correct.
be information about bank transactions or population numbers or something like that. Whereas the information is something that you can act on. So it's, in effect, the processed data. So it's the data, it's what you get out when you've applied the modelling to the data.
Well, you validate the data,
Right.
and then you have a
If you'll
process.
excuse me,
But
I
at the
am
end,
so sorry to
unless you
interrupt.
get
I
a
also
useful
have
information.
Okay.
to now to go to a meeting.
Okay, Kim, thank you very much. So we'll have you next year online on Thursday. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too. Yeah. Okay. I suppose we need to close to conclude.
Oh, thanks,
and we did not brought in things that or evidence from different national statistics offices, because most of them, to different degrees, will have said the same thing what Albina said. And what we intended to was to connect the national statistics preoccupations for modernization to the issue of data and modeling and so on. And that this is what was today the whole exercise about. But before we finish, there is a very, very well-known, was actually Hans Rosling, a statistician who, without necessarily data visualization techniques that are being emerging as we speak, was able to not validate, but to explain, to communicate statistics in a way that the context was more relevant actually than the data itself, and he made it up for the gap within the data. And the book he published and is called Factfulness, which means not that you don't need data validation and good data, but he was an optimist in relation to the fact that there is a lot of data available around which is very negative and very pessimistic, but he thinks that we are not aware about things that are better than we think, simply because we don't put the data that we have in the right context. And the right context, the right framework is what also Yanir was discussing about. I just wish Nexi and Data Science Center type could work together. But with that, thank you very much, George.
Well, thank you very much.
Kati,
a presentation and the discussion.
So we thank very much to Professor David Hand and Professor Yanir and Kim and Dr. Albina Chua and 29ers. Okay, from Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you.